Deep breath in, deep breath out. Imagine smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That is 5,460 a year, which, according to the World Health Organization, that costs you 75 days of life every year. Yet, millions are losing those 75 days without ever lighting a single cigarette because chronic loneliness damages the human body as severely as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. In today's speech, I want to do a couple of things. First, I'm going to show you how loneliness has infiltrated modern life and become normal. Second, I'm going to review what loneliness is doing to the human body and brain in ways that we can no longer ignore. And third, I'll show what actually works by treating loneliness as a healthcare crisis, prescribing social connection, and teaching emotional literacy before silence turns fatal. But before the theory, let's imagine a person. Let's call her Laura. Laura wakes up to her phone, scrolls before she stretches, listens to the podcast in the shower, eats with YouTube playing, all just to avoid silence. And after a whole day of people and noise, she realizes the only voice she truly heard all day was her own. Laura sounds specific, but she isn't, because based on how we live, how we scroll, and how we replace presence with noise, we could all be Laura. Now, on to my first point, how loneliness became normal. 1 in 6 people globally experiences significant loneliness. Among young adults, it is 1 in 2. Two shifts explain this. The first shift was digital. Technology promised the so-called connection. Yet, what it delivered was stimulation without depth. The average adult today spends up to 6 hours on screen per day. Yet studies consistently show that despite more messaging and more platforms, people feel less connected. Why? Because digital media is built for speed, not for listening, for reach, not for depth. So we became reachable, but not felt. The second shift was cultural. Political scientist Robert Putnam documented decades of decline in community groups, clubs, religious gathering, and volunteering across many societies. Yet, belonging forms through repeated low-effort contact like familiar faces, casual conversations. And when those structures weaken, loneliness becomes not shocking, but expected. On to my second point, how deadly loneliness really is. Chronic loneliness increases the risk of premature death by over 30%, raises the risk of heart disease, stroke, depression, and dementia by almost 50%. But what is happening biologically? When the brain senses prolonged isolation, it doesn't think, I'm sad. It thinks, I'm not safe. So it triggers the stress response like a fire alarm that never shuts off. Cortisol floods the body, blood vessels stiffens, inflammation spreads, immune system weakens. And at the same time, the brain rewires itself. Fear centers become hyper alert. Silence feels like rejection. So people stop connecting, and the withdrawal deepens loneliness. This creates a biological loop. Stress feels isolation, isolation feels stress, and the body slowly breaks down. On to my third point, what actually works. The solution operates at 3 levels: healthcare, social infrastructure, and emotional education. First, we need to treat loneliness as a healthcare crisis. The United Kingdom recognized this when 9 million Britons reported chronically lonely. The government even appointed a minister for loneliness. Clinics began screening for loneliness just like they screen for blood pressure or diabetes. Thousands of community programs were funded to rebuild social connections. And the results were striking. Doctors' visits fell by 28%, Community participation soared by nearly 70%, and every pound invested saved up to £4 in future healthcare costs. So the impact is measurable. When loneliness becomes a public health priority, connection becomes policy and health improves. Second, prescribed social connection. In countries like England, Australia, and the Netherlands, doctors are now using something called social prescribing. When a patient visits a clinic, they're not only asked about physical symptoms, they're also asked, how often do you feel isolated? If the answer signals risk, they're referred to a link worker, which is a professional whose work is to connect people with structured social activities like community gardens, art groups, or shared meals. In other words, connection stops being a personal burden. It becomes a part of the healthcare system. And third, the emotional literacy. Many people suffer in silence not because they feel nothing, but because they don't know how to name what they feel. The ones like saying, I'm lonely, I'm struggling, or I need help is surprisingly difficult. Hence, teaching young people how to recognize distress, how to ask for help, and how to build healthy relationships turn invisible suffering into visible need. And those visibility saves life. So here's my call to action. Look up, reach out, stay. 3 things, easy and short. So I have a task for all of you today. Tonight, before the day ends, message one person. Someone you haven't spoken to in a while, someone whose silence feels unusual. Tell them, I thought of you today. Loneliness can steal 75 days from our body, but one act of connection, one message, one moment of presence can bring years back to one's body. And it might save yours too. Thank you.